Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. Welcome back. Little delayed, apologies, but life gets in the way sometimes. But I am here to discuss The Last of Us Season 1. It is now complete. It is over. 9 episodes, 10 if you want to include the fact that if you look into it, episodes 1 and 2 were put together. I'm grateful that they did, but we'll get into it. But I am joined by I think the biggest fan of The Last of Us that I know, at least if you are monitoring gameplay alone. That's actually, in fact, she's been mentioned on the podcast before. My sister, Haley. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Or, yes, it's been discussed, so it's not a secret. You are actually born on Last of Us Day, which is
Uh, yes, you're
also
right. I forgot. So much for
which is
biggest
also
fan.
Joel's birthday. So Joel
Yes,
Miller and you share a birthday.
yeah. Joel and I
Uh
are birth buddies.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we should preface this beforehand for the listeners that there's going to be a non-spoiler section of the season 1 review. Then we will get into details, differences, similarities overall with the game in a spoiler section. Don't worry, time codes will be listed in the show so that way if you want to hop around, I am going to say beforehand, even I haven't even discussed this with Haley yet, we are not going to discuss the second game other than things that have nothing to do with the plot. So a character name, don't Google it because then you will get the spoiler. So if we say somebody's name, don't look it up. We are talking about this season. We obviously do know we are getting a season 2. Neil and Craig have gone on the record saying part 2, being the game, will be likely 2 seasons. So that's all we know. We don't know anything else moving forward, which is exciting, even though I think, well, we'll get into it. So that's it for pre-show notes. We are going to get into the non-spoiler section of The Last of Us Season 1. All right, Haley, in your best possible explanation, why is this the best video game adaptation of all time?
All right, so let's go into the history books first of why I love this game.
All
If
right,
that's all
let's do
right
it.
for you and the listeners. Um,
Absolutely.
so this game came out, or no, definitely came out before I played it. Came out with the PS3, which we didn't even own as kids. Correct?
No, that is correct. It was released in the last year of the PlayStation 3's life cycle, and then the remastered version was immediately brought or created for the
The PS.
PlayStation 4.
Correct. So
Yeah.
I put this game by myself in Kyle's room in the dark with headphones on. Couldn't hear anything else other than this game. I played it weekly because I was in my first year of post secondary and I would play it when Kyle wasn't around. And I fell in love with this game. Just
Kyle had a job, and Haley's job was
yeah,
hockey,
yeah,
which meant
yeah.
lots of downtime during the day.
And I think it was the first time I played like a true video game that had a really compelling story and campaign. I was used to like shooters, but not like a strong story like this. I think it was really the first game that I experienced something like that. Um, and yeah, just absolutely fell in love with it, fell in love with the show. I think I would say it's 90% like in terms of similarity to the video game. Like it's that close. And I
Well, they
think
definitely have taken there are elements where if you're a fan of the game, you've played through the game what, 3 times, 4
I don't
times?
probably that or more. It's like my go-to
Yeah.
game if I'm bored and have nothing to do, and I'll throw it on. I have the PS5 remastered version as well.
Remake. The terms
Sorry,
are so stupid.
sorry,
The
remake.
remake. Yeah.
But I think for someone who loves the game as much as I do, and I'm not a huge gamer, I just love this game in particular. It was such an amazing thing to see the show adaptation, and we can maybe get into this later, but like the majority of the things that they included in the show that wasn't included in the game, I was like aligned with. I thought what they did to turn it into the show and the things that they added or changed or things like that, I think was brilliant. So overall,
Well,
like,
that's the main
yeah.
sorry.
No, no, no,
The
go
main
ahead.
selling point I think for you, well, given the fact that I'm a little obviously we're in history mode, The pyramids were built by the aliens. Sorry, that's the wrong history mode. Um, that like your exposure to video games, like I'm the older sibling, so it was whatever I was playing, and
Hmm.
typically narrative games on the level of something like The Last of Us they weren't that heavily around. I was not a JRPG player, like Final Fantasy, things to that ilk, and it was typically like you had not they're not even just first person shooters with like some story involved. The Halos we had, the Gears of War, but what made The Last of Us so special amongst all those other video games, and even out of games that I really enjoyed, which I would play later on with the remastered versions of the first three Uncharted games, you can take the story out of the gameplay of The Last of Us, and it's just as compelling. And we will get into that with why the show works because one of the main, and I wouldn't describe it as a criticism, but one of the main aspects that makes it so wildly different is its use of action and violence, where that's always been a significant part of the game. It is for us up here in Canada, it is an M-rated game because of the graphical nature of the violence, obviously, and some of the storytelling. And we can get into that more specifically in spoilers with things that were just alluded to in the game that they just go out of their way to tell you um, in the series. And that's what I was so excited about was this is about a 14-hour game if you play it and explore everywhere, but that includes even some of the boring crafting and like just not saying boring, but tedious parts of the game. So when you pull all of that out, I was a little nervous that is there going to be 9 hours worth of storytelling? And for them to go out of their way to be like, yes, and your favorite episodes are going to be things that are referenced in in the game, but we just outright are going to tell incredible stories, and we'll get into that more specifically in spoilers. So I think it's funny that the biggest hurdle for me, as somebody who is an avid fan of animation and video games, I have developed an ear for voices and specifically with character voices that I really like. And that was the hurdle that the show had to get over for me was you are now giving me a live action version of these characters who are going to have distinct voices, but that's even harder when you look at something like the even with the remake, which I just purchased. I haven't played through it. I know you have, but you were getting the best quality in terms of cinematics you were ever going to get of this game, which is now 10 years, over 10 years old. So the TV show now has to differentiate itself enough to where you're going, yes, that is Joel, that is Ellie, that is Tess, that is Tommy, and so on and so on and so forth, and not go, but there's the game. Like this is and it's been a significant problem for video games. It's been now you're not you got off Twitter quite a while ago, and I commend you for that. I'm still swimming in that pool, but one of the most humorous elements of the success of this show, and it goes without saying, if you track the viewership numbers for this for The Last of Us, every episode was increasing in viewer count, which is unheard of. I think
Yep.
overall the show had gone up by double from the premiere to the finale. In 9 weeks that doesn't happen, which is something just like for itself talks about the quality of the show. And for is a great example like you're a great example where the story is so good you are compelled to play it over and over and over again.
I know, and that's why I kind of wish, I had the experience of playing the game or watching the show and not knowing anything to kind of relive
Mhm.
kind of what I lived through with playing the game. But like, and maybe why video like or gamers in general are being more harsh critics that they are. But and I like what because I listen to the podcast as well after each the like
Mhm.
HBO Last of Us podcast um, with Neil and Troy and Chris and stuff, and they're like these are characters. So these are adaptations of these characters. They don't necessarily need to be the exact same, and that's why there's like specific lines that they spoke to where we wanted this to stay because it's such a like pivotal line, but we don't need him to
Mhm.
have exactly Joel's accent or things like that or whatever. But at the same time, like video games are visual. When people talk about book readers and then they turn to movies or shows, like it's not visual, it's your own imagination, right? So nobody's imagination of these characters and these stories are going to be the same. But when you have a
Hmm.
video game where everyone's seeing the same person, not necessarily the same voice, depending on what language you're playing the game in, but of course it's going to be different. But I think what they like, I love Pedro Pascal. I'm not gonna lie, like he is the internet daddy of
It's
right
true.
now. But I think he did a phenomenal job, and so did Bella Ramsey. But you have to appreciate that they're not the same. They're not the same people. Um, but yeah,
It's
overall, 10 out
funny.
of 10.
Yeah, I think it's most rewarding for me being somebody who's so in tuned with like when I like something, I love it and I want more, and getting a different version of this story because there are significant changes to
Mm-hmm.
specific plot points, whether character decisions, and for none of that to feel unearned or feel out of place is something really unique. It's ironic given another Naughty Dog adaptation with the Uncharted film where it went, as opposed to taking what makes those characters fun and interesting, we're going to take the set pieces and have the characters feel almost phantoms of the original versions. Like they're by no means in this do Joel, Ellie, Tommy, Maureen, all those characters feel as if they are the live action version and a complete like valid in this version. If you're a gamer and you're like, you know what, I played through the game, I thought it was okay, but I love the TV show, that in itself is a success
Mm-hmm.
because HBO, and this is why I was so happy when it turned out HBO was going to be producing this as opposed to a different streaming platform. Like the time is put in, and I learned actually something interesting listening to another eel with Neil interview with Neil, where one of the things that makes HBO such a different studio as opposed to your Netflixes, your Amazons, your stars is they don't start shooting till the scripts are done. So
Mm-hmm.
every single episode was written before you go into production. And when you are working on something that for a lot of people is the greatest video game of all time, which again, the bar to clear on expectations was not low. It was very high. I'm listeners going to tell an interesting story. You and I were very excited for this. Big fans of Pedro Pascal. Obviously, Bella Ramsey, notable in I almost said The Last of Us. Well, she is, but notable in Game of Thrones. We're like, this should be one of HBO's next premiere television series. Like you knew Game of Thrones was coming. Obviously, I'm very excited about Warrior season 3. HBO, where's my date? I would like to know when I can see that premiere. But we were sitting in the waiting for the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert to start this previous summer, and a 30-second clip was packed on at the end of HBO Max's upcoming
That's
dramas.
right. I
And
forgot
we
about that too.
blared it on full
Yeah.
audio, just being like, "What are they saying? Oh, you don't know what real pain is." Ah, like
You know,
he
or yeah,
said
you
it.
don't
He
know what
said
loss
it.
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You don't know what loss is. And
Oh,
but ironically, it's funny enough because like I think pop culture is becoming more and more familiar with Pedro Pascal.
mhm.
And I can't remember where I heard this, but it is certainly true. The way that he speaks in The Last of Us is unlike how he's spoken in any other show or
Yeah.
TV or sorry, or other film. Obviously, as the Mandalorian, he's very different. There's a little bit of digitizing to his voice because he's supposed to be talking through a helmet. He's been in all sorts of other things. Kingsman, honestly, it's funniest. I think that might be the closest to the Joel voice, given how they're supposed to be from the South. But obviously, when he's playing, I want to say it's Tequila in
Mhm.
Kingsman, it's much more significant twang,
Yeah, I
right?
agree.
Because it's like a caricature where we actually get the development of this character. No, I was thoroughly impressed. I think that what I was most hoping for was in the scenes I didn't know I was going to love. I remember saying this to we are in the same sort of friend group, our gamer group, where if they do this right, this show should win awards. And each of the leads, specifically with Pedro and Bella, certainly have those performances, whether it comes to the actual drama of recreating scenes from the game and the opening of this. show is nothing like the game, but when you are getting those key character moments, why I think the show was the most successful is the anxiety in knowing what was gonna happen was equal to not knowing when you play the game for the first time, which is saying something because I've watched everybody has seen their favorite movies over and over. And even if you get into, I know exactly what the lines are, eventually with most things, the suspense is gone. You've lost it. It's like, oh yeah, this is Mufasa hanging off the cliff. I know Scar's gonna show I am the king, and then he's gonna die, and and everybody cries. But that sense of dread of Simba gonna or Mufasa gonna die, we're almost 30 years with this movie existing. Like it goes away over time.
Well, in the
And
sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
all I was going to say is I know for myself having played through the game twice, specifically with that first episode, I was just anxious through the whole thing, knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I think we knew the big things obviously, but we really had no idea what the show was going to entail. We didn't know how much they were going to adjust the story or tell a different story, which we had no idea. Like we had no idea what they were going to do. We only knew the big things that we think might happen. So like especially with the little things, like you're just as kind of on edge because you don't know what's going to happen and when. You think this might happen, but and we saw that throughout the show. Like there are definitely things that change. You're like, oh wow, like um, and we can get into it more as well. But I am glad that they stuck to the majority of the story. But I mean, they had a lot of freedom. They could have done whatever they wanted to do.
Well, I remember, I can't remember who I said it to specifically, but said that there may be like a test episode
Yeah,
because you didn't know that. And we're almost done. If you want us to get into the specific plot details, we will be there very shortly. That the first season was just going to be the first game. I don't know. For a while, I thought maybe they were going to be able to get two out of it, but at the end of the day, I think I'm glad that they did stick to it. Nothing felt stretched for no reason. And anytime there was, and I'm using this phrase just because I have no other way to describe it off the top of my tongue, which is bloat elements, it became some of the most gratifying elements of additions, as opposed to any subtraction only made it a more streamlined story. Now, there are certain elements I wasn't a specific fan of, but do you have any other overall thoughts before we get into spoilers? No, you just want to get into the specifics?
let's do it.
All right. So, spoilers ahead for season 1 of The Last of Us. You've been warned. Insert audio wipe now. Okay. So one of the I talked about we I had Shane on the show and we talked about the pilot, so we don't really need to talk about the pilot. But that the pilot is a great example of addition, but also just straight up stuff from the game. Getting to see actual shots from the video game, which was really cool and on can occasionally be ridiculous if it feels like it's unearned. And that is sort of how I feel about some of the elements in Uncharted, but this is not going to be the Uncharted bashing podcast until Uncharted 2 if it ever actually comes out. But do you like you seemed like you had something in mind specifically. Like do you want to talk about the Bill Frank episode or do you have something more overview that you wanted to discuss
I mean, I
about
could
changes or subtractions?
I could literally talk about this for days. I egg all my coworkers on about this. They just like come to me now. I've like trained them so well, and it's sad that the season's over now because we can't talk about it as much. I mean, I
Because the
think it's
Bill Frank episode is the biggest change.
for sure, and I think that's just a prime example of learning about a character that you really don't know much about. You don't know much about their story, and I knew that was something that we were going to learn about, but nobody knew it would be on the degree that it was on
No.
in the game. Like nobody saw that coming, and I'd be
One, it
shocked if
wouldn't
you did.
even and it wouldn't even technically like it's ironic because it falls under changes, but not in the way you think they might be. If you're paying attention to the original game, Bill and Frank are gay. It's it's in there if you're paying attention for the details. That's not the change. The change is actually the experience that they have together as a couple, because the end of that relationship is significantly more tragic. And what I commend the show for doing is The Last of Us through and through, while being about love and the positives and negatives about that, it's much more heartwarming while still sad than The Last of Us typically is, with them ultimately living their lives together and deciding to end them together.
Yeah, but it was a beautiful ending.
Mhm.
It was like we love each other, we're gonna die together. We live together, we die together. But in the game, it's like Bill and Frank, or at least Frank hated Bill and was like, screw you. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I don't want to live this life
I don't want to
anymore. I'm
live with you
going.
anymore. Yeah, and then Bill
Yeah.
finds him, and then like I was significantly young, like not significantly young. I was like 10. I don't know. Anyways, I was younger, so like into me, and maybe I didn't find all the letters in the game or whatever. But like they kind of
Mhm.
hinted that Bill was gay when you met him and you're playing with him. You didn't really know until Ellie's in the car and joking about the magazine that she finds and stuff. Um, and
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, how are they gonna do this? Like, are we gonna just find out how they met or like why the relationship ended, and then we go find the car battery and we deal with all these infected whatever. But I think what they did was so much better. Because
Mhm.
you're always wondering like, okay, well, how can you turn this gameplay into a show? And I'm
Well,
like,
and that's
you don't even need it.
fundamentally what they took out, right?
Yeah.
Say most of the gameplay is out of the game, and that is one of my criticisms, and I wouldn't say it's a heavy one. It's not gonna I'm probably gonna rewatch the show once I can get it all on 4K at home, but because Crave only streams at 1080p, kind of annoying. But in that I don't think there was enough clickers in the show. I
Hmm.
think they did such a phenomenal job in episode 3. No,
Two.
2. Episode 2 of having a sequence that was so reminiscent of every way that everyone plays the first encounter with a clicker, and it was perfect. And then we kind of forget about the clickers, and I understand that what and I've said this already, what makes The Last of Us so compelling is the characters. But at the same time, what you're playing a game and it's captivating. You can't have an overabundance of these scenes, but you had one in 2, you also have the obviously the horde that results in Tess's demise, and then you have the bloaters showing up in a different part of the game in episode 5.
The first time you meet a bloater in the game is with Bill. The first time you meet a
Yeah.
bloater in the show is in episode 5, where they crash into the house and like that whole like herd comes out and
Yeah.
stuff. But I
Yeah,
mean,
and those are significant changes as well, right? Like with
yeah,
the what are the brothers' names?
Sam and Henry.
Sam and Henry, right? Like we get that's another aspect of the story where it fills out the world as opposed to, oh yeah, we're just surviving and there's
Yeah,
raiders after us.
yeah, and I'm okay. I was okay with how when they introduced the clickers in the show, because in the show they're just like, oh, they're clickers, or I mean, sorry, in the game they're like, oh yeah, it's just a clicker, they just can't see the game or whatever. But I liked how in the
Mhm.
game, like they made them so much more dangerous, because they are more dangerous in the game, but you don't feel the same impact, like because you see them all the time. So I kind of liked how they
Mhm.
were rare, and I also
So
liked how,
quality over quantity of appearances.
yeah, and I also liked how they dove into like how long they actually live, because I think Joel in the show is like, oh yeah, like they, on average they don't live very long, but sometimes they live a little bit longer and stuff like that. I like love that, because then it's like, okay, now we understand that there's only a few clickers, there's not a lot. And then, same thing in the game. Like I don't know how many bloaters you see in the game, but you only see I think one in the entire show. Which just I think increases the, I don't know, how scary they are. And to that point, like if you use, I think it's episode 8 as an example, like with David and Ellie, they like fight a whole bunch of them, right? Because it's like them building trust, like all these things, whatever. And then I guess in the podcast they're saying it's like we didn't need that in the show, like we had enough.
Oh, you're saying sorry at that moment in the game. you
Yeah,
fight off all the clickers. Yeah,
yeah.
which is funny because when they one of the best aspects of the show was the set recreation in
Mhm.
terms of areas of the game. Niels talked about it when he was going through Sarah's bedroom. Was like, look at this and look at this. Like, and as soon as they were in that environment, I remember, and it's been a while since I played the game. It's been a while. And I sat there and I watched this by myself. Nalina had no interest. I'm hoping she'll watch it maybe later, but we'll see. And thinking that I'm fairly certain they fight off a bunch of clickers here. Like I don't know, maybe I'm conflating it with another scene. And then when it didn't happen, I don't know about you, but that was a moment where I felt that they didn't. Because the
Mhm.
scene with the actor who played David was so good.
Yeah.
I gotta find that real quick. Nope. Uh,
But that's the thing too,
Quick.
like, you're so nostalgic when you see these things, you're like, "Oh, man, that's right." Or, "Oh, I
Mhm.
forgot." Like, there was like, the scene in episode 5, while you look up that or yeah, episode 5 with the sniper in the house, and they're, like, sneaking around the cars and stuff. I had
Mhm.
completely forgotten that that was an actual, like, level in the game. Like, I just thought they added this in. I was like, "Oh, I love this." And then I
Mhm.
replayed it, I was like, "Oh, I understand, I forgot." Um,
Scott Shepherd.
okay, yeah, Scott Shepherd. Yeah, he was amazing. So
Mhm.
creepy, and that was the episode I was most looking forward to of the whole series, was that level
Mhm.
with David.
One this because the set piece on it in its own right was something that is compel with a and shooting that I can only imagine what kind of a nightmare that was where you have a lodge on fire.
I don't know how they, unless it was like a controllable fire that they could just.
Well, I mean, if they typically are. I don't know. I from what I remember from the last time I saw a behind the scenes of something on fire, there are elements where things are because typically when something's burning, it's either whatever this is gonna sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, and I kind of don't. The oxygenation, like whatever oxygen, because you need fuel, right? There's the
Mhm.
fuel, spark, and whatever. And so typically, if it's just like running flames, you almost have a pipe and it's sort of it releases the fire and then because it's the gas is coming out, that's what's being lit. And then you turn the gas off and the fire goes out. So I would assume just for safety, a bunch of it was probably um was
CGI.
CG, but
Mhm.
that's fundamentally one of the best scenes in the game and they did such a good job with it with like Bella's performance in that episode alone. I'm hoping gets her an Emmy nomination.
But I love how in this they made the characters, like, they developed them so much better than in the game. Not that they didn't develop them in, because they did. And you had an inkling of like, okay, they're kind of messed up. You're killing a lot of people, but you're not really thinking about it. You're like, they're just protecting themselves. They don't really dive into that until the second game where you actually see like how messed up Ellie really is. And that's how I love when she kills David, that they increase the amount of time that she's like slicing this
Well, yeah,
man's
that's
face open. Like it's like 3 times the length. Like she won't stop. And in the game you see it, but it's not that long. It's like, whoa.
well, and
Yeah.
what that does, I think what I appreciate most about what they did do with this first season is while they did not know if they were going to get a second season,
Yeah.
which I'm grateful that they approached the writing that way because there are elements that I thought for sure were going to get teased in the finale and I'm not going to say what they are, but they weren't. And the this what they did do is and I agree with you the implications of who these people are those breadcrumbs have certainly been laid down
Yeah. They're
and
definitely
we get
talking.
go ahead.
Just to say, they're definitely like taking you down that path. Like when Tommy and Joel speak about how like all their other ways and stuff. Like in the game, it's the same thing. You get the idea that they clearly didn't agree with each other on how they were surviving, but they're not like they hint at it, but they're not diving into the implications of like, oh my god, there's maybe there's other ways than just
Well,
killing
and
people.
one element that certainly makes a difference and I think I commend the show for doing this is that it's very rare for well no sorry I should let me start over. One thing that's certainly different when you are let's use the finale as an example. So we may hop around, we may not back to different episodes, but in the finale when Joel is going through the hospital and you are in control of like you are the player killing all those people just to get to Ellie, at least from my own standpoint, you're not really thinking about it. It just sort of, you're like, yeah, I'm killing these nothings because that's the objective. But when you're removed from that and you see what Joel is doing, it dramatically increases because this is not, I don't curse on this, the insanity and the dedication and violence that this character is willing to commit to do what they think is right. And whether that's right or wrong, being removed from it makes it significantly more impactful.
And I remember playing the game too. Like and maybe this is just me, not. I didn't know what was going to happen. Like there was no second game coming at the time. Like you don't know if Ellie's going to live or die. Like you don't like you see the impact of the relationship, but that's for me. That was the first time I was like, okay. You think about it, and you're like, okay, well, this is like relationship altering too. I was like,
Mhm.
even at the end where she asks him what happened or is this the truth, and you can tell that there's something not right, but I believed that she believed him to a point,
Just well, yeah, because there was no other way around it at that point, right?
right?
She's like, I love this guy. I guess I'm going to accept it because we can't really do anything else about it, right?
Yeah, and it's an amazing ending. So you're like, well, and
Back to Jackson.
yeah, exactly, and that's why I like how um just briefly in the second game that they do flashbacks because you can see how over time and she gets older and she's not a kid anymore and she's learning a little bit more, like things still don't feel as
Mhm.
they should,
Mhm.
so yeah, so
Yeah,
good.
I'm obviously we're both very excited for the second season. There's I think there are definitely going to be elements of it that almost to some degree I hope they change just in terms of like very yeah, it's not a spoiler that there are flashbacks, but in terms of humans aging, they're at least from a production standpoint certainly going to have to shoot things before they get to other things without getting into specific story elements because it is certainly funny that I think most people who did watch this and didn't play the games are so excited for season 2 and everybody who's played the games like you have no idea what's coming.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what people do, like if people like me like somewhat play video games don't, like if they choose to get both games and then they will find out what happens, or they look it up, so they like I can't imagine, like I would want to know, but we play video games, like for someone who doesn't, or maybe just like for fun with their buddies or something. Um,
I do know that in the first like week and a half, specifically in Britain or the UK, that sales of part 1, whether that was remastered or remake, went up 238%. And
and
I think that number only climbed.
what about the second game? We should look it up
So
now
I don't
because the season's over.
yeah, that's true. I'm not sure. Let's see. Last of Us Part 2 game sales. I put in two S's for sales. Uh, duh, 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 duh. It doesn't seem to be. And let me see. The sales top 37 million. So it doesn't say specifically. Well, what's interesting is for PC gamers, Part 1 of the remake, I believe, just launched on PC.
Oh,
So that
really?
opens up another avenue, yeah, for people to play the
Hmm.
game. Which, I mean, quite frankly, even though I haven't played it yet, I would say if you have a PS5 or a PC, just get the remake because it is the best version of this game. I'm not going to argue whether it should have been the cost of a full game. That's neither here nor there, but having the best version of it is always the way that I'm going to recommend to play it. So,
It's crazy how much better look. Like I was watching the other day, like
10
the
years.
yeah, the making of compared to what it looked like then to what it looks like now. Like I can't believe it.
It's
Um,
certainly remarkable and I've there are there is hasn't been confirmation yet as to when they're going to be start shooting this season. I think it all depends really on what Pedro Pascal's availability is, because that guy is busy as all can be. So
Yeah.
let me
Overall,
know on. Sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 I was just gonna say that I'm just really happy that it was so successful and that it's seeing this crazy word of mouth um, traction, and I feel like people are gonna still continue to watch who haven't watched it live. And I just love that it's a true love story to the game and still successful. Like
Yep,
that to
that's
me
true.
is just like so awesome to see that it wasn't, that it was just a good TV show or a good game and then the TV show died. Or it was a great TV show, but it wasn't what the people who played the game wanted it to be. It's like both. Like it's a true, true, true adaptation of the game, and it's incredibly successful, and it's an incredibly good show. Like they did so
Mhm.
many things well. It wasn't missing one piece or the other. There's sure like little
No.
tiny things that maybe you're like, oh, I wish that was in there or whatever. But the majority of it, everything that they added to make it more developed of a story, I completely agree with.
Yes, I agree. And I think what I'm most excited about was the time and money put into this and the return from the viewer numbers, the growth you mentioned already, that I'm hoping that that is an indicator moving forward for production studios such as Amazon and Netflix, who are going to be making God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn. I don't know what they're going to call that specifically because there's two of them and they have different subtitles. I don't know. But those are going to require more VFX significantly just based on the nature of those stories. And I'm hoping that with the success of this and being faithful to the material leads to more respect for the genre. Because one thing a lot of people who are diehard movie fans don't really know is that games do way better than Hollywood. So, and there's a clear, and it's funny if you are a listener of this and you watch the show, and as an example, you're not really a comic book fan. The most successful movies based on comic books are respectful of the material. Being condescending to where you came from is never going to be a successful route. And so I'm so happy that two of us as just as an example, and there has no been, at least from the where I've been looking, there hasn't been any negative outcry from the gaming community who played this game, which is saying something because without getting into it, if you were a on Twitter or social media when the second game come out, that was slightly different story. So it'll be very interesting to see where we are moving forward. Um, this is the first time Haley's been on a film and TV podcast. You may have to wait again until The Last of Us season 2 comes out. Haley, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
If you are looking forward to next week of the podcast, I will be reviewing Shazam Fury of the Gods with returning DC expert Stephen Colbert of Snyder Minute and ScreenRant.com. So you can look forward to that next week. That will be done on our regular scheduled time. And there may have been some news today, DC related, that I'm looking forward to talking to Stephen about. I will see you next time.